You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hey, welcome to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. I'm Jimmy Carboni. I'm the host. It's Tuesday, October 29th, 2024. Wow, it's been a great 15 years here on Heritage Radio Network. Support us, become a member at heritageradionetwork.org. So we're talking about malt and in the context of food hubs and how important it is in our food supply, but also just how good good craft malt can make a beer. One of the pioneers in the new kind of realm of craft malt is joining me today. Phil, why don't you just give a quick intro to yourself?
Thanks, Jimmy. I'm based in Walla Walla, Washington. I come from a background mostly environmental science and water resource management, and then got into malt as sort of a odd lateral move in my conservation career. And the goal was to start a malt house or a malt company more broadly as a way to be able to work with farmers on adding value to the crops that they grow, and in turn being able to help fund conservation work on their farms.
Yeah, and we've done a few good shows together. I mean, when did you start actually diving into craft malt?
Oh my gosh, it's been 10 years now.
Wow. We did a couple of great shows. We visited some people we worked with. I remember Omega Distillery in Alaska. That was a pretty cool show. And you're always seems like you were working on collaborations a lot.
Yeah, I mean our story or arc as a company has been very collaborative. I'd say uncommonly collaborative in the malting space, and for better or for worse, we've always had a hard time getting everything to line up together at the right time to build our own facility to malt at the kind of scales that would make a difference for landscapes in a conservation sense, and for the farmers we want to work with. But we've instead over the years collaborated with a number of other maltsters who do have facilities and from time to time have had extra capacity that they weren't using, and have been able to keep our business growing through these contract or toll relationships.
Yeah, so this a few years ago was your original vision. Just tell me what that was.
Sure. Yeah. So the last time we spoke, we were pretty close on the heels of a facility build that we were working on from 2018 to 2020, and a long time in the making, and then ultimately cut short by rolling it right into COVID, and among other things, just a whole bunch of risk factors that made it and simultaneous opportunities that made it more wiser to back away from the facility. We ended up selling our equipment to a company in France, and they've gone on to scale quite a bit, and so that's a cool sub-story there. But yeah, we pivoted and moved our production out to Montana, and had a few years of growth in that sort of the biggest ever toll or contract partnership that we've ever had. And ultimately it's tough to keep something like that growing long term without the stability of any of our own capacity. And so we started to what brings me here today is a story about how we've rolled our recent toll malting successes into revisiting our own facility build now that we're a few years past the lockdown phase of the pandemic.
So this is exciting news. I mean, you've been trying to reach me for a while, and I think this is a big story. So tell us about this. There's going to be a regional food hub, and you're going to somehow be part of that. And tell us where it is. Give us the whole story, because sometimes I forget even where you are.
Mm-hmm. So Walla Walla is in Southeast Washington State, and the malt house, the current project we are working on is just like 30 minutes north and a little east of us in a town of Dayton, Washington, in Columbia County, a small town, maybe a little north of 2,000 or 2,500 people, and agricultural processing town historically. Also has a little ski area, but anyways, yeah, so that's where we're at. The process of building a malt house, there's a number of ways to get it done. A lot of people have come at it really small and scrappy, and that has its benefits of being able to launch quickly and get into it. And from my vantage, the biggest drawback is just a lot of those businesses end up getting or have gotten stuck in just a rut of not being able to expand. And so it's pretty clear to us over the years that if you weren't going to get into this at some significant and consequently expensive scale, it's tough to get these to break out of sort of high labor, high cost of production, high pricing, and difficult to scale model. So I don't have many millions of dollars laying around to build a malt house. So in trying to figure out how to go about this facility build, it was important to figure out to find some sort of development partner to work with. And so here in Washington State, we have these port districts that are economic development districts and economic development and transportation districts, and they're roughly overlain on counties on a county level. So in this case, I had reached out, and it was pretty clear by the end of 2022 that there were a number of things that we were lacking as a company, physical infrastructure wise, that would make it hard to scale in any case, whether we were doing our own malting or whether we were just trying to grow our malt sales through some other production partner, another malt house like Link or Skagit Valley Malting or Montana Craft Malt in the past. We reached out to Port of Columbia that had this 10-year track record with a food hub called Blue Mountain Station, Artisan Food Center. And so they had been operating one building, like multi-tenant building, where people could rent space and have their own winery, distillery, bakery, dry goods packaging company or what have you, and a coffee roaster, that sort of thing. All food and craft related. And then there's also a commercial kitchen where people can access. And generally the idea has been to lower the barrier of entry for food businesses.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Okay. So Port of Columbia, they have this great food hub. A lot of experience getting public funding to support it. It's a rising tide kind of dynamic where it's not about any one business, but about how you build the infrastructure that is needed to support, the ecosystem where multiple businesses and potentially even like nonprofits or government entities working in this space could thrive and collaborate. And so we pitched the port on the idea of using a malt house as an anchor business to support a bigger movement into the grain space.
That makes a lot of sense. It seems like regional food hubs are a good thing for agricultural regions, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things working against small business, right? There's the food system is notoriously big, and from a small business perspective, not very accommodating. Individual businesses and those who want to support the growth of local foods, more sustainable foods, things like that, really need to think long and hard about banding together and providing, if you're from the government entity perspective, providing base infrastructure to really support this like larger movement.
So let's give our listeners like some specific examples of how the hub can benefit the project you're talking about. Right now, I'm thinking about being a farmer with vegetables, but you need to be big enough to fill a tractor trailer. Then when you get the tractor trailer, you have to figure out, can the tractor trailer actually get in onto your property? How do you load it? And the same thing when you take it to the next destination. I'm sure there's 100 other things like that you have to think about when you're doing anything to try to grow. You want to give me some examples from malting and growing grains and rotational crops and some of the challenges that the smaller farmer might encounter?
Totally, yeah, and you're thinking along the right lines on kind of the clunky nature of being a smaller entity operating in food systems, and sort of the big challenges you run up against. And so, yeah, bringing that into the grain space. Everything works better in full truckload quantities. And if you can keep full truckload quantities in bulk and not have to move packaged, to move grain around in like large intermediate packaging, they have these 1-ton super sacks that are sort of the bane of many small farmers and processors' existences. But the extent that you can move larger amounts in bulk around from step to step, you get a lot more efficient, you reduce labor costs, and you can ultimately be more competitive in the marketplace. So that sort of thing is relevant for any kind of grain business, whether you're talking about a flour mill, whether you're talking about a malt house, whether you're talking about any number of related enterprises, and if you had a bakery that does their own milling, that sort of thing. From our perspective, we've experienced the process of scaling through the very uncomfortable phases of having to set up. To give you an example of harvest takes place late summertime, grain needs to go somewhere. It's great if you have a farmer that has a bin on their farm or multiple bins on their farm that they can just put it into right away. It needs to be tested. If it meets acceptable spec for the end use, then you need to come up with a plan to mobilize that to get cleaned. So that's removing fine bits and small kernels and maybe other kinds of crops that got in, or weed seeds. Once you get to that part, then it's okay. Now you can mill it. Now you can malt it, sprout it, what have you. And so the reality for a lot of smaller mills or malt houses is that they're having to piece these steps together across large geographies. So if you don't have the money for a fairly, it's not the most complex thing in the world, but a grain cleaner and all of the dust collection that you would need to operate it safely and without ticking off your neighbors, then if you don't have that, if you can't invest in that, then you have to find somebody else to do it. The timing has to line up right, where they not only have the capability to do it, but they have the availability to do it. If you could bring that in-house and say share the use of a seed cleaner with a number of other businesses, or at least one other business, that really helps with the feasibility of any of those businesses. So cleaning's one example, and storage would be another example too. And so looking at this as how the malt house could help multiple other businesses, basically if we are set up to, if Mainstem Malt can say, hey, we are in this not just for the good of our, the bottom line of our own company, but we want to be a part of something bigger. We want to help lower the barrier of entry for other businesses, and we want to find ways where our success can support their success, and their success can in turn support our success. We can bring in grain in full truckload quantities, something that a core part of the facility's function will be set up to clean full truckloads of freshly harvested or field run grain and get it ready for malting. So we could easily do that for a mill, baker, pasta maker, any folks like that. And there's also synergies. I'd say the big synergies are on these infrastructure pieces like storage and cleaning and packaging, but they're also on distribution, like warehousing and distribution. A lot of these businesses are solving the same fundamental challenge of adding value to rurally produced grain goods and then mostly driving them into metropolitan centers to sell to places that are high volume and value the product that's being made.
It's pretty exciting that you're working on it. I remember before you were talking about a few years ago, it sounded like you were going to have different malt facilities in different regions and some kind of new vision. And I know you're a visionary. Just for like more detail with the new malt house and farm partnerships, you kind of outline what some of the things how you would benefit those farms, but a little more about it. How do you go about forming these farm partnerships, and then how do you get the end users? If you're deciding on whether it's a brewery or or distillery, you've kind of done quite well with that, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been. Yeah, I think we've done remarkably well for a malt house that has a malting company that has never had its own malt house. We've done remarkably well for at getting product that getting malt that has an interesting pedigree for sustainability and innovation in general into the hands of I'd say industry leading artisans, and be them brewers or distillers. Haven't worked with a bunch of bakers, but that's a interesting. We've certainly had folks that are interested in it over time, and yeah. So I think, for us, the biggest thing about having our own facility is just to have the stability of our own foundation, our own foundational capacity to do the things like bring in grain, process grain, package malt, warehouse malt, ship it out. Like those things, if they're moving on you too much, it's hard to form these long-term partnerships with growers or brewers or distillers. And so, yeah, just sort of trying to pin down as many of those variables as we can. That's at the root of it. And then as we look to benefits for farmers out of all this, it's really, they don't grow a ton of barley in this area anymore. There is the ability to grow quite a bit of high quality barley, and some of the nicest barley we've ever seen has come out of our backyard here. And so largely the lack of barley is due to pricing issues, and it's hard to make money on it. So if we can add value to the crop by premiumizing malt to even a small degree, it helps farmers that we're working with incorporate it into their rotations. So you mentioned rotation crops earlier, and barley is a real special one. There's on the farm side benefits, and then on the brewer and distiller and baking and culinary side, we want to lean into being able to innovate real deeply with accounts that want that sort of thing. Like this is a challenging landscape in the craft beverage alcohol industry, right? And it's not like the challenge means you just simplify and cut costs and cruise off into the sunset with a successful business model. It's like, well, most of these challenges point to like an increasing need to innovate, and of course there's going to be cost sensitivity on for brewers and distillers looking to make payroll and stuff like that. We see a continued need for brewers and distillers to have a supply chain partner on the malt side that is helping them solve on multi-year challenges and multi-year opportunities.
Phil, it's funny right now for my listeners. It's kind of cool. I feel like I'm sitting in on a finance meeting and getting a pitch on your project, which is what I wanted you to do. But now I'm going to flip it because I don't know if for my listeners, I'm a geek about craft malt, and one thing that I got exposed to during the pandemic was more craft malt and the Craft Maltsters Guild, which I know you're a big part of. So I want to turn the conversation to when you start talking about the farms and the malt. Most people don't really think about the beer or they salivate. I do. Right now in my head, I'm thinking of some really great beers I've had that have been made with craft malt. So like recently in New England, our friends Blue Ox Malt in Maine. There's a couple. There's one Northwoods in New Hampshire, and not too long ago I was there, and just the styles it's the kind of beer I want to drink right now. I want like kind of an amber lager, and I'm craving it. And so tell me about a couple of the breweries, distilleries you've worked with in the past. Just, I want to get people thinking and drinking. So
Sure,
I'm a good distillery. That's Sexy. It was in Alaska. I never got to try anything. Tell me about a few other operations that are going to make me thirsty.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, Amalga's a great example. And just like, in Juneau, they've been a core account since 2018. And that's a whole nother story. I think we've gotten into a decent amount in the past, but, it's single malt whiskey. That was the real opportunity with Amalga, and it really followed from our work with distilleries like Westland Distillery, Copperworks Distilling, two Seattle-based distilleries, Westward in Portland, Freeland in Portland, Bird Creek. There's for us, this American single malt whiskey movement, like this movement to make a truly American whiskey that is not bourbon, that rivals the best single malts in the world out of, say Scotland or Japan. Yeah, this has been the most lucrative space for us to be playing around in. It definitely has kept our lights on over the years. I would say that the beauty there is a single malt whiskey distillery has a premium product to sell. And so they're not, generally going for a lower shelf item. They're trying to get it as high as possible. And they don't have many different variables to celebrate. They have the malt. It has to be 100% malted barley. They have, their own in-house process. They have on the brewing and distilling side. And then they have barrels, time compared to, say, craft beer, which really gets a lot more distracting with a whole bunch of different things going on that are all great, or most great, and not necessarily all pointing back to malt as the foundation. You have something that's really like squarely celebrating or positioned to very squarely celebrate farm stories and landscape stories when it comes to the barrel side.
So single malt, American single malt whiskey is a quintessential way to represent craft malt.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I were to just one more piece of the puzzle there is kind of related to the higher shelf nature of it is single malt distillers have understood since very early on in craft malt that like they could pay a lot more for malt and get far and above the value, that cost in value on the sales side. So if they were able to say, this was made with barley from that is Oregon State University's full pint variety, and it's grown in Athena, Oregon, and this is the 2018 crop year. That's pretty cool. Like that is something that I think any sort of alcoholic beverage nerd would be able to say, oh yeah, no, I get that. I'd pay extra few dollars for that.
How did whiskey become associated with single malt whiskey? Like, how is a single malt? I understand, but explain to me, why is a single malt whiskey different from a blended malt whiskey, but the same techniques?
So it's you can make a single malt whiskey with multiple different kinds of malt. So that's, I guess, where it starts getting a little confusing. Essentially, it's
so it's not
100%
just one malt. Okay.
Yeah, it's 100% malted barley. I mean, it comes out of the Scottish tradition of whiskey making. There is a special designation for the single malt category where 100% malted barley.
There's not other grains in there.
Correct, no adjuncts, and then additionally, it's from one single produced at one single distillery. So. So it's like a single distillery malted barley whiskey. That's correct. Yeah. In a place where it's very common where whiskey was produced as a commodity, by and large, became a commodity and was blended across many different distilleries, and barrels were traded, and there was a much more fluid culture of how grain, how malt, and how distilled spirits, and how finished bottle ready product made its way into packaging and out into the world.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So better understand that. So now for beer, because I'm getting thirsty.
Yeah.
With beer in the fall, there's harvest season. We celebrate fresh hop beers, and with wine and cider, we celebrate this harvest season now. How do you get excited about a special malt in a beer? Are there certain styles or breweries that you work with that you want to give a shout out to?
Yeah, certainly. I think there's a lot of different ways to celebrate malt in beer, and I'll start with the one that has really very little to do with style, or nothing to do with style, and that's community. It's coming out of the pandemic. There was this hunger for like connection and community dynamics, and trying to support things that meant a little bit more in your day-to-day purchases and stuff like that. So I think regardless of what's being brewed, there is a way to show for brewers to show their customers, hey, like, maybe you taste the difference, maybe you don't. Maybe this is craft malt and a super like double dry hop IPA, but you should know you're supporting a local farmer and a local maltster who are fighting the good fight out in the countryside. So from more style wise, it's like I said, you could have a double dry hop IPA that benefits story wise, but I think you can also have something like craft malt is showing really high quality and really good performance in the brew house. It's like comparatively fresh because there's not like mountains of malt being produced that need to be moved around the world and stuff like that. So there is the potential to use craft malt to make even a double dry hop IPA better. Some of the more like malty, interesting styles would be, obviously the whole expanding lager space is a really good thing for business for craft maltster, and generally just having a beer that you're used to taking a little bit longer producing. You have an increasing number of discerning palates, really like teasing apart what's going on in there, and then in the finished product, and also just having less distractions in terms of usually not super hoppy, and often without much in the way of adjuncts. So I think another category that's exciting, or kind of two categories, would be like low and no alc beer, and so that's interesting because, well, I think coming into the market with, say, a non-alcoholic beer for a while, maybe that was kind of enough, right? Like, hey, our beer tastes good, and it is, it doesn't have alcohol, and you can drink 5 and feel fine the next day. But it's gotten, like everything else, to be a rather busy space in the marketplace. And so there's a way for, we have 3 Magnets Brewing has been one of our core brewery accounts over the years. It's in Olympia, Washington, on the other side of the Cascades from us. But they have Self-Care Beer, which is their non-alcoholic brand, and they kind of differentiate themselves from the rest of the NA beer space by just continuing to do really interesting one-off stuff as they move forward with the project. And so when they do that, they can, say which malt house they are supporting with that product. They can talk about which malt they used. They can say, celebrate the fact that, they made a Pilsner style NA beer with Pilsner malt grown and malted in the Pacific Northwest rather than hauled in from Germany. And so all of that has been really cool to see. We see breweries like on the Oregon side, there was just a Oregon Agricultural Trust benefit beer project that we moved through called Oregon I Am and Cheers to the Land. Sorry, that's the one. Cheers to the Land. A bunch of different breweries were celebrating their usage of Oregon-based products, mostly agricultural. We had a couple of different breweries, Ferment out of Hood River and The Wheel both make IPAs using our malt. And so I should say all the grain we've purchased to date has been Salmon Safe certified. And so that's a eco label that focuses on stream and river health and reducing erosion and say drift contaminants into waterways. Breweries like Ferment and The Wheel have been really good about and excited to incorporate that sort of messaging into their products because they're right on charismatic rivers of the Northwest and salmon and fisheries in general around here are a really important part of culture so to be
the next time I have you on, we're going to set up a show maybe in a few months where some of those Pacific Northwest beers you can send out to me and we'll drink them on air maybe with one of the brewers. We're going to take a short break. We're going to be back in a few minutes on Beer Sessions Radio.
Whether you're a chef or just love going to restaurants, you know the best ingredients are everything, especially when it comes to beef. In Northern Australia, there's a different approach to raising high-quality beef. Westholme, based in Queensland and Northern Territory, is working with the land to create nature-led Australian Wagyu. Westholme stewards 16 million acres of rangeland guided by their natural ecosystem. They're led by a belief that if they balance the needs of their cattle with the needs of the environment, both can thrive. Westholme's team of rangeland experts and nature managers use a variety of tools to monitor and respond to the welfare of the environment, like satellites that assess grass health and on-the-ground research. Cattle are happier when they have the freedom to forage and explore, so Westholme ensures that they can roam wild, foraging at will for the first 2 to 3 years of their lives. Their cows graze on native grasses like Mitchell grass, which is only found in Australia, along with dozens of other plants, herbs, and seasonal legumes. The result is a high-quality Wagyu beef that reflects the terroir of Northern Australia and a flavor suited to complement any cuisine. Westholme believes that when nature leads, flavor follows. Learn more at westholme.com.
Hey, welcome back to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. I'm Jimmy Carboni. We're celebrating 15 years on Heritage Radio Network. Support us and become a member at heritageradionetwork.org. So I'm talking with Phil Neumann of Mainstem Malt, and he's working on a very cool regional grain project. Phil, you back with us?
Sure am.
Back on. So we were talking a lot about your background and working with malt. Just tell us a little bit about your role in the Craft Maltsters Guild. That's how I know you, and by getting to know that organization, it's really expanded, my network of craft maltsters.
Yeah, volunteering for the Craft Maltsters Guild has been an important part of my life, and work with Mainstem since getting started, and late 2014, 2015, and Yeah, basically, there's no worldwide. There's no other industry association that represents smaller scale malt production, and so the Craft Maltsters Guild, we just celebrated our 10th year anniversary, and year 11 at this point. And so the founders of this organization were both trying to build their own businesses from the ground up and figuring out like how to do everything on their own related to malt production, and how to cobble together the resources to build their own ragtag equipment and just like get moving in this space and make it a thing. And the Craft Maltsters Guild, they banded together, formed the Craft Maltsters Guild, and it became a really North American focused but globally inclusive industry association to support craft maltsters and the important work they're doing in the grain chains.
Well, just from hearing about what you've been through, growing and changing your business, and looking forward to this regional grain hub, gosh, it's a scale up, isn't it? I mean, it everything we talked about, from how you pick up and sort and transport, the barley, and every step of the way. It's a lot of logistics.
A whole lot of logistics, and we operate in an industry that, if you're not a craft producer, you're just one of a small handful of mostly multinational, malting companies, and that they solve these problems on scales that are just unbelievable. So everything's much more, generally speaking, when things are going smoothly, cost efficient and relatively stable. And so trying to figure out, okay, we know there's merit to building local to regional grain economies and having malting be a key part of that. But how do you bring the good, all the good that comes with that, in a way that is doesn't break the business case for a brewer or distiller wanting to support this movement. That's the challenge.
Can you give us a sense of the scale? Let's say, I know that in like Western Canada, there's really big barley farms and big processors, which is where a lot of malt for beer comes from. What's the scale in those kind of operations? Are we talking about an entire train full of grain? Are we talking about multiple trains of grain?
Yeah, in your in a big malt house, a small batch would be like a full truckload quantity. So 30, 35 tons of barley being converted into malt in the course of a week in one system, and that would be like a very small batch. So kind of 200 tons is pretty common these days. Can certainly go much higher than that in a single batch. And that's 2,000 pounds per ton, or metric, another 10% on that, 2,200 roughly.
So how many truckloads is that?
So I don't know, what is what
like
is
6 or 7?
Yeah, if you have there's if you have a 200, something like that. And I would say then you're looking at the size of these plants, annual production. You're talking hundreds of metric tons per year of malt production. And whereas the facility that we're developing right now would start at a scale of about a little shy of a couple thousand. So maybe 1,750, something like that. Very similar to what root shoot malting in the Front Range, Colorado is operating. Same system. Very different scales. That would be certainly big and plenty nerve-wracking to operate and make sure it's functioning at full capacity most of the time. But yeah, thinking about how to keep a 250 or a 500,000 metric ton plant busy. That's a whole different several different orders of magnitude.
Yeah, then you're in some kind of nightmare movie, right? Lots of moving parts. No room for people.
Well, I mean, it really just means that you're reliant on global systems for the distribution of the malt that you're producing at that point. So you're not, if you were to have a 250,000 metric ton malt plant, you hope to sell as much as you can into your region because that's your most cost and price competitive environment to be in. But I think more often than not, you're looking at how do we keep the plant busy, and where are the emerging markets? Where can we send shipping containers of this stuff out to East Asia, or things like that to keep busy. Whereas the Craft Maltster is the goal is not to ship far. The goal is to do as much business as close to home as you can, and that's where the value proposition really shines. That's where people care about you the most. They care about the farmers producing your malt, the grain that makes the malt the most. And it's the best sustainability story because you're keeping the shipping miles down, and you're generally, if things if supply chain disruption is a concern, there are less moving parts to derail your malt source when stuff hits the fan.
Well, I'll tell you what, Phil, it's great to catch up with you. This is another one of our kind of ingredient-focused shows. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about corn. This week, we're talking about craft malt again. And I'm a believer in what you're doing. I'm a believer in Mainstem Malt. Most of all, I'm a believer in the cool distilleries and breweries that you work with or will be working with. And I can't wait to drink the product. So, let's reschedule something in a few months and get something in a glass in front of me, and we'll keep talking. All right. So Phil, good luck with Mainstem Malt, and we'll keep us posted as this regional grain hub keeps evolving. And I want to just any last words you want to say?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll give a plug for Mainstem Malt. You can follow us at mainstemmalt.com on Instagram or most other social channels, and then Craft Maltsters Guild is Craft Malting at Craft Malting, and stay tuned for more information on MaltCon 2025, which will be happening in Denver, Colorado, from February 27th to March 1st. So that would be if you're interested in learning more about malt, finding a way to get involved. Those sorts of things, then you might consider getting yourself a ticket and joining us.
And what I like about the last I was at the main Craft Malt conference in 2023, and I know you did something similar in 2024 in Davis, California, is a chance to taste beers made with some of the craft maltsters, and that's what turns me on to it. So. Something to look forward to.
This should be a good one for that.
Definitely. So thanks so much again, Phil, and a big shout out to Gabe, our engineer. I'm Jimmy Carboni. We'll catch you next time on Beer Sessions Radio. All right. Thanks so much.